This episode is brought to you by Cologuard. Do you know what's really scary? Not screening for colon cancer when you turn 45. The Cologuard test is non-invasive, requires no special prep or time off work, and ships right to your door. In just 3 simple steps, Cologuard takes the scare out of colon cancer screening. If you're 45 or older and at average risk, ask your healthcare provider about the Cologuard test. Cologuard is available by prescription only. Learn more or request a prescription today at Cologuard.com/screen.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Welcome to your weekend, ladies and gentlemen, as we kick it off with the Dr. Sky Experience. Here at 1-800-848-9222, celebrating and marking 1 year here on this great radio station, the Powerhouse Blowtorch, as we like to call it, emanating and broadcasting from the center of the universe, New York City, to the nation, the world, and I'm sure even out to the cosmos. We thank our helmsmen, Tony and Bill, for making the sound and, of course, the continuity of this show as good as you would expect. Great information here, as you tell us, as we mark so much information from the great realms of astronomy, space, aviation, weather, a mix of celebrity guests, and stories of American exceptionalism. And once again, to get in touch with our special guest, because the callers rule on this particular radio show, it's 1-800-848-9222. As we say happy spring to many of our listeners around the nation, incredible temperatures experienced not only here in the Southwest, where I broadcast from, but all over the region and other parts of the world. And as far as the reason behind it, we continue with one of our excellent guests that you tell us you like so much, and that is Tom Harris. He's the Executive Director of the Ottawa, Canada-based International Climate Science Coalition and a policy advisor to the Heartland Institute. He has 40-plus years' experience as a mechanical engineer, project manager, science and technology communications professional, and so much more. His website, proud to say it here on the Dr. Sky Experience, is icsc-canada.com, icsc-canada.com. With that, a hearty welcome. Tom Harris, thank you for joining us, and do appreciate your content and contribution for the whole year.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sky.
It's always a pleasure. You know, the world is changing, and in so many ways, people are scratching their head, and they're curious. For so long, we've been hearing about a climate hype. Many people believe it's not really true, and of course, the great research that you do with the organization. We're here to talk more about this, but the question, Tom, that I would throw out to the audience: when did you, ladies and gentlemen, have thoughts that the climate science consideration here is more of an exaggeration as reported by the media? And if so, when? And if not, why? Would take both sides of the equation. But catch us up to date on some of the interesting stories. We have a whole full hour here in hour 1 and hour number 2 to go over that. Once again, thank you, Tom Harris. Let's continue.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're starting to find out that other factors such as clouds are almost certainly a much more significant climate driver than is carbon dioxide. And it's interesting because a group of Chinese researchers put out a paper just a few months ago in which they took temperature readings from all across the oceans with buoys, and they ran the different models to see what they would expect temperature changes to be over the decades if they used carbon dioxide as the driver, which is, of course, what most of the models do, or they used clouds, changing clouds and humidity and that sort of thing. And what they found is that they had much better accuracy, much closer match between the computer models and the observations if it was clouds and not CO2 that was the driver. So that's an interesting finding. We're also finding something interesting in Canada. I think I touched on it last. And remember, Canada is a huge part of the world temperature network. So if the temperatures in Canada are wrong or change a great deal, it has a big impact on the world. And it's interesting because what they found was that in 1998, which is a very strong El Nino year, and we can talk about El Ninos later, there was a sudden jump in temperature. But the temperature didn't drop after the El Nino was over. It actually stayed elevated, and that's not what carbon dioxide would do. You know, it's interesting. They say that Canada's warming at twice the rate of the rest of the world because of carbon dioxide. But it turns out that practically all of the warming of the last 70 years occurred over a period of about 1 year, which is
That's
not
amazing.
the way.
Yeah.
It's not the way carbon dioxide would cause it. If it was carbon dioxide causing warming, then it would be a gradual warming year after year as CO2 rose. But what they see is a sudden step up to a higher temperature. Now, the initial step was probably caused by El Nino, and we see that in the satellite data. But then it stayed high. And you sort of say, well, that doesn't sound like a carbon dioxide effect. It sounds more like what they call the AMO, which is the Atlantic Meridional Oscillation. It's basically in a warm phase right now, and it lasts for about 30 years. We'll come out of it fairly soon. We won't know for sure until the AMO is over if the temperature drops when the hot phase is
Correct.
over. So it's actually very much up in the air, if you can excuse the pun, but it certainly looks like Canada's warming is not caused by CO2. You just don't have, if CO2 was the driver, you'd see a gradual rise in temperature over the years. But instead, almost all of Canada's warming over the last 70 years occurred in 1 or 2 years, and it just stayed high. So, and since then, the temperature has actually dropped slightly. So, they're finding a lot more about the data and how it's really being affected, which is almost certainly natural, having nothing to do with carbon dioxide.
Let's bring up a subject in astronomy, the term albedo. And for those that don't know, here we go, and Tom will elaborate more when we talk about clouds. The amount of light that's reflected, in other words, what's received from the sun on a planet, to the amount of light that's reflected. Venus obviously has a very high albedo. That's why, of course, we see it so bright. That's a much lengthier conversation. But talk about this. Are we saying, or are you saying, or can you tell us, are there more cloud formations on the Earth now? And is that something that's really related to this whole change, El Nino and the La Nina? What would you say about clouds increasing or decreasing? Because what? They do a lot of reflectivity, I imagine.
Yeah, well, it's been actually decreasing since the Little Ice Age. And in fact, it's almost certain that the Little Ice Age was cold, partly because it was so cloudy, because the clouds reflect sunlight back into space. And it's interesting because when you look at the paintings from the old masters, in the 1600s and 1700s, you see they have very cloudy skies, and people thought that was just an artistic license to make it sort of look dramatic. But they're finding now, when they look at various records, various proxy records, they actually determine that it was much more cloudy during that period than it is today. And of course, that's one reason they say that it's gotten warmer today is because there's less clouds overall, less clouds than there were, 3 or 4 centuries ago. And that's interesting because when you have more clouds, not only do you reflect more sunlight, but it indicates something else is going on. And what that is something kind of interesting for Dr. Sky especially. The Earth and the whole solar system is being bathed by what are called galactic cosmic rays, which are really particles, and they come zooming in from space. And when they hit our atmosphere, they cause nucleation, they cause clouds to form. So if you get more galactic cosmic rays, you're going to get more clouds. Now, when the sun is active, the way it was, at the end of the 20th century, the sun was more active than it had been in about 8,000 years. And so what you have is you have a lot stronger magnetic field, you have a lot stronger solar wind, and that helps hold the galactic cosmic rays away. Now remember,
Correct.
Galactic cosmic rays cause clouds, and if you push them away because of a more active sun, that means you're going to have less clouds. And with less clouds, more sunlight gets through, and you get a hotter Earth. And so
well, Tom, that's why I'm glad we have you here, because let me explain in further detail. You've done a great job. You're right. As the seething of the solar cycles continue, it is in effect like a little bubble to protect us from some of the excess amount of cosmic radiation. But you're right. On the side, when the solar cycle wanes, a lot more can come through. But there's not a whole lot we can do about that cosmic, energy that's coming through in the cosmic ray realm. So obviously there is a connection before people jump to the conclusion that humans have caused all this problem for so many years. And again, if you're just joining us, ladies and gentlemen, always a friend of the show, Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the Ottawa, Canada-based International Climate Science Coalition. Your questions and commentary, as I mentioned before, are kind of a question to the audience. When, ladies and gentlemen, did you ever believe that climate science, as reported by mainstream media, was an exaggeration? And if not, tell us why, too, because we're open for conversation here. But it's amazing as things go on. So what are you saying, then, in conclusion? That as the solar cycle then wanes, we would continue to see a higher incidence of cosmic radiation coming through, as it's done for what? Probably millions of years.
Yeah, exactly. And, the peak in the solar cycle 25 was around 2025. And so that's when you'd expect to have more solar wind and stronger magnetic field. So you'd have less galactic cosmic rays coming in. And that may very well be one of the reasons that, we've seen an increase in temperature in the last few years. But that's going to be cycling. The sunspot cycle is like an 11-year cycle. So you see that as a little blip on top of the bigger blips, the bigger cycles. And it is interesting because there are many solar cycles, some like this one, for example, it lasts only about 11 years, but you see other solar cycles that last for decades and some even for centuries. And here's the thing that might surprise your audience. Once every few centuries, all of these different solar cycles will hit rock bottom or rock, at the very top, but they all hit rock bottom at the same time. And that's happening again in the year 2060, 2061. We don't know the exact date because the solar cycle, the solar cycle length changes over time. And when all of the solar cycles hit rock bottom at the same time, the forecast, the Russians that study the sun, for example, they're saying that we're going to get very cold conditions, even conditions that could go as far back as the Little Ice Age, because the solar cycles are all coalescing, all at the bottom, all at the same time. So if we're going to plan for any climate change, really global cooling is more likely to happen. And, of course, it's totally out of our control. So that's the kind of thing we should prepare for. And,
well, talk a little bit more about this, Tom. This is interesting, too. As I study the sun, I observe it regularly. And for those, of course, that want to get a better look and see of what's happening with the sunspot cycle, just go to spaceweather.com. You can look on the left side of their website for a live image of the sun, and the sunspot count is down to like 39. But what I want to ask you about is the Maunder minimum that happened. It was an interesting event that was put down in the chronology of solar cycles, where there was a period of time that we had in June we actually had a winter in, let's say, the New England areas. Correlate that, because the solar cycle then, as you're describing, when it goes way down in that other cycle, it can be a big change in weather here on the cooling side, as you're describing.
Oh, yeah, exactly. The Maunder minimum, like 1650 to about 1750, that was a period of very cold weather, where, in fact, in England, and also, by the way, correlated with the cold weather is also much more extreme weather, much more storms and that sort of thing. It's interesting because they keep telling us that as global warming occurs, we're going to have more storms. Well, it's actually the opposite. It's during cold periods, like the Maunder minimum, when they had such strong storms on the coast of England, it swept away complete towns that were on the coast. So the Maunder minimum was a very cold period. Now, I don't know if, by 2060, will it go as low as the Maunder minimum? I don't know. It might go only as low as the Dalton minimum, which was around 1820. So we really don't know what the effect is going to be. It's interesting. Some people are saying, some scientists who study the sun, they're saying, well, let's hope that carbon dioxide is warming the Earth, because that might make the minimum in 2060 not so bad as it was back in the 16 1700s. So the sun is on these sunspot cycles, and sadly we do have these minimums where, in fact, it gets pretty cold.
But if you listen to legacy media on so much of this, obviously that's why we threw that question out, and we'll do it again. When, ladies and gentlemen, have you thought from mainstream media that climate science is an exaggeration? And if so, tell us when and why. And if not, you can stand your ground at 1-800-848-9222 as we explore the many mysteries of the universe from the great realms and great guests that you tell us that we have here on the Dr. Sky Experience. It's very interesting. So if you look at that whole Maunder minimum, the whole change of the sun, I just want to say it again and get your second nomination here. All weather is driven by the sun. And again, if you could corroborate that's a simple statement that people need to know.
Yes, I think ultimately you're right, because even though some people will point to ocean currents or they'll point to clouds, ocean currents and clouds are largely driven by the sun. I mean, that is the source of energy, except for radioactive. That's the source of energy for life on Earth and that runs the whole weather system. It's the sun. And, we do have some sources of heat deep in the Earth, but really everything comes from the sun ultimately. And so what it does, it changes ocean currents, it changes cloud cover. It's interesting. The change in cloud cover is so huge. It's like 10 times the whole human influence is clouds. I mean, it's just amazing how much it causes. So, we really have to look and understand the sun, and that's why we have some satellites that are flying over the North Pole of the sun, for example. And, these different spacecraft are letting us understand the sun a lot better.
You're right, and the Parker Solar Probe goes to the front of the conversation. In many people's minds, they may not even be aware, one of the most incredible spacecraft ever developed to study the corona, the outer atmosphere, as we call it, of the sun, and the powerful solar wind that you know all about, and the audience may have a little bit of information. It's incredible, Tom, that it got as close to the sun as about 4 million miles, traveling, ladies and gentlemen, I'll repeat it, at the incredible velocity of 430,000 miles an hour. 430,000 miles an hour. And guess what? It survived. So kudos to the technology and kudos to the engineers that built that amazing, amazing spacecraft. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, and it's interesting also because people always talked about the solar constant, as if the sun was a constant ball that just sat there. And it changes. It changes a lot. Right. And you can see it. You can see it in the geologic record where the sun at times was much brighter than it is today and times when it was cooler. I mean, we're happy. We're right in the middle of its lifespan right now. It's, roughly 5 billion years old. And it'll, around 10 billion years, it'll go to red giant stage. But we're right in the perfect spot. We got billions of years to go.
Right, but don't tell that to people when they're looking to fill their gas tank, because if we could harness the fusion power of the sun, that would be incredible. Some efforts are being made. A whole entire different show, though, Tom, about the need and necessity for the fusion power that could do things that are quite amazing. The power of the sun, that's another whole subject unto itself. But what I wanted to talk with you about here, and again, ladies and gentlemen, 1-800-848-9222 is our way of inviting you to the conversation here. We like to call it Theater of the Mind, and many of you out there send us nice emails saying that they wholeheartedly agree. But what's interesting here is we talk about what's happening in the world of the climate. I just want to mention something. As we look at the temperatures right now, New York City, the center of the universe, as we broadcast from, 49 degrees Fahrenheit. Ottawa, Canada, 26 degrees Fahrenheit. But Phoenix, Arizona, right here, 86 degrees. But the reason I mention those temperature changes, here's the most ridiculous thing, and it's very sad, but it's a climatological, record. The highest temperature supposedly ever recorded on March the 19th in U.S. history, and I'm just reading this, occurred in a town very close to Yuma, Arizona, Martinez Lake, 110 degrees Fahrenheit from March 19th, totally off the charts. Give us from the meteorological side some of your reasons why this is happening. Some say an excessive high-pressure system moving over the Pacific, now going to be over us here in the Southwest on Sunday. How do you correlate that in March, Tom? Isn't that totally incredible? How do you bring that to the table?
Yeah,
here?
It is unusual. I mean, we're coming out of a La Nina phase, and we're going into a El Nino, which they're saying is going to be strong in the summer. And I was looking up for fun to see what the impact's going to be on Arizona, because you're in Arizona, right?
Yes.
And it doesn't look too bad, actually. It's saying heat, still hot. El Nino doesn't reliably cool your summers. It says that your wildfire risk is going to be less. So that's nice to hear.
Oh, you bet.
And I didn't realize that you have monsoons in Arizona.
Oh, we do. Yeah, that's a horrible thing for many because, not to get way off subject here, but if anybody hasn't been to Arizona, not to scare you from coming here, with the obstreperous temperatures in July and August, we get a phenomenon that starts probably around the middle of June, not like the clockwork exactitude. Maybe by the 15th of June, maybe all the way to the end, probably till like October 1. But what you see is a large buildup in the southwest or the northeast. The northeast storms come from the Mogollon Rim, really powerful thunderstorms. But through Mexico, that moisture pushes up. And when it hits the higher temperatures and the humidity, we can get these big dust storms, Tom. They're like the planet Mars called haboobs. And it sounds like a funny name, but it really describes this most amazing orange 3 to 4 or 5,000 foot wall of dust. And it almost looks like you're on Mars, and it gets into everything. It even comes through the crack of your garage door. I've seen it come, you hear the wind, just it lets it seep through if you have a little crack in your garage door. But it gets in everything, and it does happen. It's probably good for the hydrology, the watering of the desert. We need the water, but it doesn't come with just water out of the ground. It comes with force. That's amazing.
Well, right. It reminds me of Zion National Park. They say at certain times of the year, you do not walk up those valleys, up those crevices, because there can be a flash flood of 8
Correct.
feet high water just suddenly woof right over top of you. So,
right.
But Zion, that's in Arizona, isn't it?
Well, that's up in Utah. That's the Utah part.
Sorry.
That's okay. No problem.
Has similar sort of effects. But
Right, but the poor people in Globe, Arizona, Tom, they had horrific storms this past year. And when the ground dries up, they had some of the most horrific, the loss of life and property in Globe. And it happened a few times due to Mother Nature, because the ground, of course, cannot handle all that kind of rain. And just like in South Texas, the horrible events that happened there, throughout the Texas Hill Country. Prayers and afterthoughts for those that perished in that. But the weather can be pretty wicked. But we're here to talk with you about so many subjects. 1-800-848-9222, ladies and gentlemen, to join our conversation. If I can, let me steer this in a different direction. You write so many interesting articles that I think people need to know about. But there's one that kind of caught me, and I thought it was quite interesting. You talk about, in a little different realm, this subject of subcutaneous microchip mandates. Now, people may be wondering, what does that have to do with climate? But it goes along with this whole global effect of what? In many people's mind, surveillance, control of people. What the heck is this? And the state of Washington has come out legislatively to do what? To stop this. Identify what this topic is all about. This is interesting.
Yeah, they've started to do it in parts of Europe. I believe in Ireland, for example, they're doing it, where they actually put tiny microchips in the just under the skin at the back of your hand, and it allows you basically to have all your personal information there, as well as credit card information. So all you have to do is wave your hand against a sensor. Now, of course, one of the troubles is you don't know when you're walking down the street who has a sensor. So they could be right. They could be right beside you, getting all your data right off your hand. I don't like that idea personally. I think it's pretty creepy. But it is true that we're seeing more of what they might call cyborgization, where, more and more artificial things are being put into our bodies. I mean, I have a heart stent, for example. I got it put in 10 years ago, and it pretty well saved my life. So there's lots of really great things that we put into our bodies. And it's interesting, there's an anthropologist I work with who studies the future of humankind. He looks at the past, and then he says what's coming next. Dr. Charles Laughlin, you might remember him from my articles. He's an amazing character. But regardless, he says the next stage in human evolution is cyborgization through the insertion of artificial things more and more, but also through drugs, quite frankly, because, it may come a time when, if you're competing as a salesperson with other salespeople, you may have to take certain drugs because they, your competitors are outperforming you because they can work 20 hours. They can work 20 hours a day. Yeah.
This is so Orwellian, Tom. It's just so amazing that we're even in these conversations. And people may know, of course, another great guest that we have here on the Dr. Sky Experience by People's Vote is, of course, Patrick Wood, talking technocracy. But the reason I brought that up is, this is interesting. We're seeing animals get the chip. And many people say, well, why not? In case my animal's lost, dog or cat or whatever. Yeah. That's a cool thing. But how is it? It's really a slippery slope, because then it comes down to you and I. I would say no, and I would say emphatically hell no, that they're going to put that in my body. But then again, I'm just one guy with a microphone here. But here's the interesting part about it. If then that does become mandated, talk about what the legislation is in Washington State. And I'm kind of surprised at this. Tell us about what legislation is on the table to stop subcutaneous microchip mandates. That's an interesting story.
Yeah, I think the fear is that employers might insist on it. and that they're trying to, basically short circuit that so that they can't insist that you get a microchip put in. And, it's not too far-fetched to think that employers might do that, because think of all the employers who said you had to get the COVID injection, and in fact, even people who were working remotely, who weren't even going into the office, were being told you have to get the injection or you're going to lose your job. And a lot of people did. I have family members who work remotely with a university, and because she wouldn't get an injection, I call them injections because, it's debatable whether it's really a vaccine. But regardless, she lost her job because she wouldn't take an injection, even though she was working remotely. So if they can force you to take a experimental medication, injected into you, then I think putting a chip in your hand is not difficult. It's not something that's hard to do. In fact, it's interesting. At some of the trade fairs, people line up and they actually get them put in right there. And people say, it didn't hurt very much, and then they walk away and their credit card and all their ID and their passport and everything is stuck in the skin in the back of their hand. But,
well, if you don't know what rights you've had, how do you know what rights you lose? And that's a whole other subject here before we go to the hard break at the bottom of the hour. But tell us in summation, what was the legislation or is the legislation? I think Washington State, what's the whole purpose behind that, and define what they're trying to do in order to curtail this?
Yeah, curtail it, but I'm not really familiar with it beyond that they want to make it so that employers, can't dictate to their employees that you have to get this thing stuck in your... I don't know any more about it than that, quite frankly.
No, I
appreciate that. Right. Yeah, I'm glad to see that some of these, legislators are starting to look at this because... Yeah, if you get everybody sort of, classified with a thing in the back of their hand, you can start scanning people as they walk by you. And, it's not too long before you end up with a social score. And if your social score is too bad, like in China right now, you can't get on the bus. You can't get on the subway, And, of course, they have facial recognition for virtually everybody in the country. Apparently, China has one camera for every 3 people in the country, something like that. And, their facial recognition gone through the roof. So if you want to see where we're headed, if we allow things like chipping of people, take a look what they already have in China, where you have social scores for individuals, which allow you less or more access to social services.
Well, again, not to be on a bully pulpit here or to be on a big stage and the virtual and the radio program here, but the truth of the matter is, this is interesting. When will people wake up to the fact that, hey, you do and should have choices in these things? But I don't know. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir, but I hope there's members out there of the choir that will pay attention.
Yeah, in Canada, of course, during the truckers' protest, we had a first-hand demonstration of that because what they started to do was they started to freeze people's bank accounts who gave donations to the truckers, and people who gave as little as $50 were having their bank accounts frozen, not only their own personal bank account, but their bank accounts of their spouse, of their children, all these people, because the government was able to track them down. So, to a large extent, I think we should use cash as much as we can.
Amen.
Because when you start using credit cards all the time for everything, and I know they're super convenient, but you're trackable. So it's only a matter of time. If you look at the Great Reset, what they want to do is track everybody. And, I don't think that's very healthy.
Well, you've heard the other side of the coin from those that want it. If you've got nothing to hide, then why don't you just comply? But I guess, obviously, this audience, a lot of smart people out there in all parts of the nation and around the world. We're almost at the bottom of the hard break at the hour here, at the bottom of the hour, I should say. Tom Harris is our guest. If you're just joining us, the Executive Director of the Ottawa, Canada-based International Climate Science Coalition, a policy advisor to the Heartland Institute, and he's got well over 40 years' experience as a mechanical engineer, project manager, science and technology, communications professional. And by your likability, ladies and gentlemen, that's why we have guests like him back to talk in an open forum, like we call it, Theater of the Mind, about so many of the things that are going on in the world. The main mantra of the show has and always will be to open up our minds about the great mysteries, not only in science, but also the stories of American exceptionalism and beyond. His website, icsc-canada.com and 1-800-848-9222. To have you join in the conversation, we will be right back.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Hi, this is Barry Farber. You're listening to Steve Cates. He is a man of many words, but much wisdom in those words. Always refuse to be a victim. Fight back legally and responsibly.
Global warming. It is a hoax. It is bad science. It is hijacking public policy. It's the greatest scam in history. So said John Coleman, the founder of the Weather Channel, many years ago. 32 minutes after the hour, we continue in force with our special guest, Tom Harris, Executive Director of the Ottawa, Canada-based International Climate Science Coalition. Isn't that interesting, Tom? I mean, I had John Coleman as a guest on other shows that I've done in my life.
Oh, yeah. I like
boy, he
that.
was just so adamant about this. I mean, he's passed on to the infinite, but did you ever have a chance to speak with him? I mean, an interesting man and a businessman. Tell us that. I want to hear about him.
Yeah, John was a humble guy. You know, he was an enthusiastic guy, and that's, of course, why he was a good weatherman on TV. But, I mean, he was also extremely knowledgeable. He would speak at the Heartland conferences, and I should just let you know that on the 8th and 9th of April, coming up, if people go to heartland.org, they can watch a conference in which all kinds of the leading experts in the world will be speaking. John Clauser, who won the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics, who told Joe Biden when he went to the White House to be congratulated that he was wrong on climate. Joe was not happy about that. But John Clauser is going to be speaking. So people should go to heartland.org. And right now on their homepage is the announcement of this conference. And they're bringing in literally the top people in the world to show that the climate scare doesn't make any sense. William Happer from Princeton University is there, and all sorts of people. You know, while you were on commercial break, I looked something up concerning security, and I think your listeners would get a kick out of this. In today's Epoch Times, I get the hard copy of it. I'll just read you a couple of sentences. It says, Chinese electric vehicles present risks for Canadians who are critical of Beijing, as the vehicles are capable of sending camera, microphone, and location back to China. Okay, and this is coming from a professor at the University of Ottawa who's a specialist in China. It said, in addition to camera, microphone, and GPS data, get this, the software in these electric vehicles is also capable of downloading the contents of the driver's phones even when the car is turned off.
Wow. Now, this is a bit dystopian, right? This is all Orwellian to the max. That's incredible. That is.
That's
and
right.
It's not and you know something? I really like the Epoch Times. I mean, you're like yourself. I read them regularly. And, of course, they have a slant very heavily against the Communist Chinese Party, to say the least. But that's interesting that more data collection, because, hey, if you can do that. But I wonder, are those cars still sold in America, too? I mean, not that the Canadians should suffer, but I wonder if that's also, is that a global sale?
The problem is our new Prime Minister Carney has decided to sort of buddy up to China more and more because he wasn't getting along with Trump. He somehow thinks that China is going to be better than Trump, which is insane, of course. I mean, you know, China has organ harvesting and all kinds of incredible things. They have slave labor, et cetera. So he's making deals to allow Chinese electric vehicles into Canada very easily. And the Americans don't like that because you could easily see them driving across the border, bringing all their spyware with them when Canadians go on holidays, because that's what's embedded in these cars. It's spyware, basically. But imagine gathering all the contents of your phone and having it broadcast back to China. And this is no joker. I mean, she's a professor, Margaret McQuaid Johnson, a Chinese expert, senior fellow at the University of Ottawa. She actually testified before the House of Commons International Trade Committee on March 12th, and that's what she told them. She said, look, you're bringing in a massive security risk to Canada by bringing in these Chinese EVs. Now, as she points out, it's kind of funny to hear the way she says this. She says, this would not be a problem for a normal country, but China has shown malign intent towards us. And Chinese companies are required to spy on behalf of Chinese intelligence service whenever requested. So,
you know, I heard something else, Tom, not to cut you short here, but this came to me from friends of mine that are engineers, and they, you know, all over the country, but friends here in Arizona. They said that it is the duty of any of the Chinese students or people that are working for these companies to what? Send as much information in the form of espionage back to the motherland. I mean, I didn't think that was an exaggeration. Tell us that.
Well, that's right. In fact, just down the street from me is Nortel, or at least it was Nortel, until it sunk, and China suddenly, Huawei actually went through the roof in the same field, and apparently a lot of Nortel's secrets was stolen by China, and of course boosted Huawei. And when National Defense took over the huge building that originally held Nortel scientist researchers, they found the whole building was loaded with bugs. There were spyware everywhere throughout the whole building. And it's interesting that a friend of mine is a chief warrant officer in the Canadian military, and he knows about this. And he said, when we took over the building, it was full of bugs, sending information, presumably, back to China. And so the fact that Huawei suddenly had its stock, soar, and the company did extremely well in the field that Nortel was working in, exactly as Nortel collapsed, well, that's the consequence of industrial espionage.
Amazing. Yeah, that's something, Tom, and we hear about this. And, if that's a main tenet for people who work here, not every person who is of Chinese national origin is doing this, I imagine, and I hope not. But the point of the matter is we have to be very careful about this, and not to get way off subject from the original intent of having you. You're a man of many, experiences, and you write regularly for America Out Loud. Talk a little bit about that, because we're going to get into some of those articles. And what's more important than that is you, ladies and gentlemen, the listeners of the Dr. Sky Experience. Give us a shout, 1-800-848-9222. We welcome your conversation to this particular episode.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one quick thing about China, and that is that most of the Chinese people, they are leaving the Communist Party en masse. I mean, they don't like having a dictatorship, you can be sure of that. And the people that run Epoch Times are Chinese, some of whom were actually in concentration camps. Okay, so I mean, I love Chinese people; they're wonderful. But it's the Communist Party. It's the Communist Party that is the problem. And of course, it's so hard to get them out of power, because the army is not the People's Army; it's the Communist Party army. They run the army. So imagine if the Republicans or the Democrats had their own army, and it was the biggest army in the country. Yeah, it's not a very good situation. So I feel very sorry for the Chinese, because of the fact that they can't get out from under. They can't get out from under this thumb, and that's why I love the Epoch Times, because they're so brave. Because they've had their...
And Tom, again, not to just plaster them all over the universe, but let me say this, their in-depth reporting, I mean, you can really get details. They dig into these stories like a lot of whatever left, newspapers are left, or other, sites on the internet. But this is interesting. Also, a thing that I enjoy about this group that comes to the United States and maybe Canada and all over the world, except for China, is the Shen Yun actually dance troupe that comes out.
Yeah.
That show I've been to so many times, and I encourage people within the sound of this powerhouse station, if you have an opportunity to see these Chinese performers, this all in support of freedom, not the opposite side of communism in China. That's interesting.
Yeah, and in fact, the Communist Party has done their best to sabotage them as much as possible. And so, of course, my daughters and wife, that's part of the reason they went, to support them.
That's
so
beautiful.
I think people should support them. They're very brave, very much like the Epoch Times people. It's interesting, Dr. Sky. I mean, China's got a marvelous history. We were talking about space a little bit last time. And did you want to talk a little about China's exploration in history? Because it is kind of amazing. And it
is
relates
amazing.
Directly. Yeah, it relates directly to the space program. And did you want to talk about that a bit?
Well, I want to mention something. Let's save that for hour number 2, because I have a good reason behind what I'm saying here, but not to cut you short. The interesting thing I want people to understand is China, the Communist Chinese Party, has an interesting 100-year plan. And people may go, well, what do you mean by a 100-year plan? Well, I just said it. What do we have as a 100-year plan here in the United States or Canada or other places? You see how focused they are about how and what they're going to do? There's a 100-year plan. Yeah. Talk about that. Yeah. That's impressive.
Well, that's right. 2049, they want to be the dominant power in the world. And they're getting towards it. I mean, they're doing amazing things. They very likely will have the first moon base. So China is advancing. But, the interesting thing is, friends of mine who've been there, they say that it's the contrast between the super rich and the super poor. It's like they're in different centuries. Like they say, you can go just a few blocks away from the very wealthy and you have the very, very poor. So, the Communist Party, people forget, when they talk about Hitler, they forget that both Stalin and Mao killed more people. Mao is the greatest murderer in history.
Totally correct.
he starved complete regions of the country, leading to millions of deaths because they weren't following his Great Leap Forward or whatever they called it. And that party is still in charge. You know, I mean, people like to think that it's not as bad as it was then, but it's that party is still running China. And, you know, we've had special MPs here in Canada, members of parliament, who've investigated their organ harvesting, for example. I mean, it's horrific. They take bits and pieces out of people, like their eyes or whatever, while they're in prison. And then I suppose eventually when they want to take their heart, they have to kill them. But, you know,
that's horrible.
Like something out of science. Yeah. It's like something out of science fiction.
It sure is. But again, Tom, they have a 100-year plan about what they're doing. And, of course, I thought there was a German term, I may mispronounce it, called Lebensraum. And it was something to do with the effect, just like in Nazi Germany, the ability to conquer land, because I gather one of the Chinese leaders at one time and one of their ministers of defense said basically, with our population, it's impossible for us to live in this square area that we have. We must do this. We must expand our horizons and populate those other areas. That's an interesting concept, and it's part of the 100-year plan. At least that's what I read.
Yeah, and it's also interesting how China is actually expanding its control over places that it doesn't actually rule. You know, and you look at Africa, for example, and they get countries to sign up for the Belt and Road Initiative, where they say, oh, we'll build you this port, you know, for your ships, and it'll be wonderful for your country. But what they don't say is that down the road, when they can't pay back the loan, China simply takes over part of their country. And so they're actually doing this all over the world, you know, where they're taking over bits and pieces of countries, taking over ports, and you know, the green energy thing is actually a real boon for China because 70%, if you look at it on average and you sort of average all the materials that are needed for wind and solar and batteries, about 70% of all the materials come from China. In some cases, it's like virtually all of it. Like 85% of the rare earths, for example, come from China, where they have neodymium and dysprosium, you know, things like that, which give you super magnets, which are great for wind turbines. But the trouble is, they're made in China and they're mined in China. You know, and even in cases like lithium, where most of it's not mined in China, it's processed in China. So what you find is that if we switch from our, you know, natural gas and oil that we have right here in North America, as we switch to wind and solar power, we become more and more dependent on China.
We take a break now, ladies and gentlemen, on the Dr. Sky Experience. Your questions and comments, the phone lines are open, 1-800-848-9222. More on the other side as we move to the top of hour number one. Your questions and comments as we focus back to the original concepts here and topics. We talk about climate science, whether you believe it or not. Your opinion counts, and we'd love to hear from you. More with our special guest, Tom Harris.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Hi, this is Shirley MacLaine. I am having a wonderful time talking to Dr. Sky. Since I've spent a lot of my time looking up, I love to discuss what is underneath. And always remember to keep your eyes to the sky.
Global warming is controversial, of course, but the controversy is maybe over whether human activity is the primary cause and driving it. A quote from astrophysicist Michio Kaku. 47 minutes after the hour. We welcome you to the conversation, ladies and gentlemen. We love critical thinking and, of course, the conversation in dialogue. 1-800-848-9222. Tom, very interesting here, all the articles that you've been writing for America Out Loud. Let's talk to one of these that I think could probably take 4 hours to explain, and I know you can do that in a shorter amount of time. You have an article here about the COP30 conference, and it's something that sounds technical, the Declaration of Informational Integrity on Climate Change. What does it mean for the U.S.? First of all, what is it, so people can understand it in simple English?
Yeah, for sure. They're very concerned about the idea that people like me are allowed to speak, or people like you. And so they consider our statements, not our opinion or a different point of view, they consider it definitely misinformation. So they've actually come up with a declaration where they're going to fight against us and purposely force high-tech companies, Facebook, et cetera, to pull our ratings down, and in some cases to shadow ban us, so that we don't get our information out. So, I mean, it's interesting because in a way it's a compliment. You know, they say that, like with Gandhi, at first they ignore you, then they fight you, and then they lose. But the fact is they can't ignore us anymore because what we're saying is so commonsensical. You know, what we're saying, for example, is that, yeah, look at the extreme weather database for the United States. Find me a record that was set in the last year. You can't. Okay, you go back to 1936. You find there were 27 extreme weather records set, things like highest temperature, you know, strongest wind,
yes,
biggest hailstone. And so people, you know, these are basic facts that you just look it up on the internet. And how much is sea level rising? You know, it's like 10 inches per century, and you say, well, that doesn't sound like a catastrophe, you know, and so many, how many polar bears are there? Well, there's 5 times as many as there were in 1960. So the fact that the data itself, the actual empirical evidence that we observe around the world doesn't support the climate scare, that's why they want to shut us up, because in fact, it's just not there. I've never seen a field where virtually everything they say is wrong. Whether it's extreme weather or whether it's ocean acidification or polar bears or temperature, all these things, they're 100% wrong. And in some cases, like I said earlier, they say, for example, extreme weather will increase as we have a warming Earth. Well, it's the exact opposite, actually, because the warming occurs most at high latitudes. And so if you have high latitudes, like in the Arctic, warming more quickly, then the temperature difference between the high latitudes and mid latitudes is less. So the driver of weather becomes weaker. So you have actually less extreme weather. And we know that because when we look at the Little Ice Age, the Chinese researchers have looked at sediments at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, and they found that it was during cold periods when they had the most typhoons and the most tropical cyclones, because, of course, the cold weather is what brings the extreme weather. And the Chinese have said that. So, of course, the answer that the UN people is, well, shut them up. You know, don't let people hear them.
Well, Tom, this is interesting. It's kind of an understatement. It's obvious to many people that the more we think we know, the less we know. But the whole climate science conversation is not absolutely settled. No doubt you would agree. But here, this is an interesting quote, and I've repeated it many times before. Shakespeare's comedic play, As You Like It, has an interesting quote about those that think they know it all, and it goes like this, and I quote, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool," end quote. So the point of the matter is, you brought up something to this audience, and we're going to refresh it. Explain to us the interesting phrase, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Please continue.
Yeah, well, that's hilarious. They did research into how confident people were based on how much they actually knew. And they delved into various fields in philosophy and different types of science and things like that. And they would ask people questions, and they would evaluate whether the answers were right, of course, but they would also ask people before they were asked the questions, how confident were they in that particular field? And what they found was that the people who were the least confident, the people who knew the least, this is the key point, the people who knew the least were the most confident. So, and of course,
funny.
I think it's and the people who knew the most were more humble. Yeah, and so they found that the least knowledgeable people overestimated the degree to which they were right, and when they actually gave them the quiz, they were wrong in most cases, even though they thought they were right. And, we see that constantly in the environmental field. The scientists are generally more conditional. Well, this may be true with a certainty of plus or minus 2 degrees or whatever, and so they're not likely to give the extreme statements. But what you get from the virtually knowledgeless activists who couldn't tell you what an El Nino was, and they wouldn't know the difference between a thunderstorm or a hailstorm. I mean, these people really don't know much about it, and yet they are so confident that we're destroying the world. And you look
Absolutely.
at
that's why we need to do forums like this. I mean, if the other side that doesn't believe that what we're saying is correct, if they had an open forum, why can't we at least have, as we are here, having a civil conversation where the art of debate should be something that's not, started with a riot or a revolution, right? I mean, that's totally ridiculous. Can't people just speak?
Right.
and give
That's
their
right.
opinion.
And,
right.
I think I mentioned this last time, but the perfect response to this is exactly what the android Data in Star Trek gave when he was trying to evacuate a planet because the aliens were coming back to inhabit it, and the Federation had said, yeah, you can have the planet back. And Data said, you realize if you're still here when the aliens get here, you're all dead. And the colonist leaders didn't want to hear that. And so they tried to shut him up. And he finally said this, and this is what I've said actually at environmentalist meetings when they try to shut me up, turn off the microphone, whatever. Is your point of view so weak? Yeah. Is your point of view so weak it cannot withstand rational debate? And the bottom line is that the UN essentially have said, yes, their point of view is so weak, all they can do is tell us to shut up and get the social media, Facebook and X, and get them to censor us and even make it illegal. Like in Canada, for example, there was one MP who actually put forward a motion, and thankfully didn't pass, to make it a criminal offense to actually question some of the business to do with Native people. For example, in Canada...
Unbelievable, Tom. This is incredible. And why people let it stand. So how did you fight it? How do you fight that? Tell me.
Well, it is tough because if the mouthpiece is controlled by people who are happy to do the censorship, in Canada we have huge censorship because the government pays 50% of the salaries on average of all the journalists in the country. I mean, you've got the CBC, which is the national broadcaster. Of course, 100% of their salaries are paid for by the government. But during the COVID so-called pandemic, the government decided they had to fund media to keep them afloat. And so, but they didn't stop, and they're still doing it. In fact, up to 50% of the salary of all journalists in Canada in mainstream media are now paid by the government. And I've noticed a huge change. When I started writing in this field in 1999, myself and the other professors that I was working with, they would actually, we get published from coast to coast. Literally, every major newspaper would pick us up. And then around 2010, things started to change. They started to reject our pieces, even newspapers that were previously very much on our side. And now, holy smokes, there's just 2 or 3 papers in the whole country that will take our articles, and even then they water them down. They water them down, and they give you a choice. They give you a choice. You either have your article published saying, well, it may be this or it may be that, or we won't publish at all. And so I've had people contact me, like William Happer and others from Princeton, after an article that we've had, let's say, in the National Post, which is a pretty prominent newspaper, and said, well, why are you saying it might be this or it could be that? And I had to tell them, because if I said it wasn't this, as your data shows, then they wouldn't publish. So, yeah, the big problem is how do you get your word out? And, of course, one of the best ways to get your word out and to actually fight against this is talk radio. I mean,
well, exactly, Tom. And excuse me for cutting you short here because of time. That's not the only reason here, but something more powerful. The COP30 Declaration of Informational Integrity, that's on the pathway to what? Reducing or censorship. You can't speak, and this is a terrible thing. So what happened at the end result? The United States, of course, did not sign on to this. Tell us the rest of the story in just a minute or so.
Yeah, Canada signed on to it. Europe, most of the European countries signed on to it. So what it is they're going to start to establish legislation to actually start to censor speech to do with climate. Okay? And they're going to try to force the tech companies to actually deplatform people. I mean, if they take this to the extreme that the actual declaration seems to be pointing in, then it will be against the law to actually speak out like I'm doing right now. So it's
at least while we can, right? Who knows what comes next? And I'm not saying here on this particular station, but obviously the freedom of speech here. I guess, I don't know, does Canada have a First Amendment? No, not really, right? Or do they?
Not really. It's very much undefined. Your stuff is much more clearly defined. You have to remember Canada is a constitutional monarchy, so we still have Crown land. And, it's interesting. On Crown land, they can be doing Agent Orange testing or anything they want. And you're not allowed to find out as a citizen. In the United States, you can find out.
Well, we're going to find out much more, Tom, as the clock runs out here. With Tom Harris, our special guest, by popular demand, ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, and I believe it, 1-800-848-9222. I'm kind of surprised that many people haven't jumped in on this particular conversation, but we have another hour to continue to explore not only these subjects, Tom, but lots of subjects that I want to get into with your engineering and aeronautical background. And we keep this open in your commentary on some of the things going on in the war in Iran, here in the United States, around the world, and to all of our listeners, ladies and gentlemen, we do appreciate you. We'll be giving in hour number 2 a short sky update, as the main tenet of the radio show has always and will continue to be, talking about the wonders of what you can actually see in the heavens as the prima facie part of the Dr. Sky Experience. We'll be right back with hour number 2 on the Dr. Sky Experience. Don't forget, you can chime in at 1-800-848-9222 in the Theater of the Mind. We'll be right back.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
2 minutes after the hour, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us and spending part of your weekend with the Dr. Sky Experience. Always great guests, as you tell us. The contact number, 1-800-848-9222. Guests from the realms of astronomy, space, aviation, weather, celebrity guests in the mix, and stories proudly of American exceptionalism, about truth, justice, and the American way. 1-800-848-9222 as we continue with our special guest, Tom Harris. If you're just joining us, he's the executive director of the Ottawa, Canada-based International Climate Science Coalition, a policy advisor to the Heartland Institute, and he has well over 40 years' experience as a mechanical engineer, project manager, science and technology, computer, and communications professional. He joins us in hour number 2. Well, Tom, lots to talk about here. I want to talk a little closer to my location here in Arizona and also various attorney generals around the United States. The headline here in Arizona, Attorney General Mays condemns the illegal recession of EPA's landmark 2009 greenhouse gas endangerment finding. Thus what? A simple lawsuit from the state of Arizona, and I'm sure others fighting against the EPA in a Supreme Court decision a long time ago. Talk about this and what's happening.
Yeah, we have to go back to, the period during Bush's administration, the second Bush. The environmentalists wanted carbon dioxide declared as a pollutant because if it was, it could be controlled under the Clean Air Act. But, Representative Dingell, who was one of the originators of the Clean Air Act, he said, no, the Clean Air Act was not established to control carbon dioxide. It was established to control real pollution, things like sulfur dioxide and particulates and things like that. But you see, they wanted the Supreme Court to tell the U.S. government, no, this is actually a pollutant. So that's what happened. In 2007, the Supreme Court declared it a pollutant and said that NASA, or not NASA, but the EPA had to actually find out if it was causing dangerous harm to humans or the environment. Now, Bush kind of dragged his feet on it. But when Obama came in, boom, right away, he had his EPA do what they called an endangerment finding. That was in 2009. And they examined whether or not carbon dioxide actually gave, a serious threat to human health and welfare. And they decided that it did. And as a consequence, the EPA had no choice. After it had been declared that A, it was a pollutant that could be controlled under the Clean Air Act, and B, it did pose a threat to the health and welfare of human beings, then the EPA had to regulate. And that was the foundation on which all kinds of regulations were established. Everything from, the energy usage of your stove.
Exactly.
To automobiles, to power plants, to all sorts of things. Now, they haven't rescinded the whole endangerment finding, but they've rescinded part of it. And the part they rescinded was the part that applied to automobiles. So that's what the EPA administrator has done, and that's what these lawsuits are trying to stop. But of course, the whole point of the Clean Air Act was not to control climate in the year 2100. It was to control real threats to people right now. So, I mean, withdrawing the EPA endangerment finding is very powerful because it pulls the legs out from under so many of these ridiculous climate regulations, restricting our usage of energy.
Very controversial, but I'm hoping that these lawsuits, of course, succeed. No, not these lawsuits, but I'm saying the continuance of being able to do these different things, as the Trump administration is obviously trying to check the climate, alarmist theories out there. So obviously we hope those lawsuits don't continue. Let's continue with the callers. They rule here on this show. Line number 1, he's been waiting. We say good morning to Pete in Staten Island. Thanks for joining us. Your questions, comments, please continue.
Hi, yes. About the chipping. My daughter has me chipped. My daughter has them in my wallet, in my bag, in my car. My daughter could tell me where I went. If I'm out at Aqueduct Racetrack, she can locate me.
Wow.
Did you win? And then I'd be there. When I come home, she'd say, Where's my part? I go, well, you can pay half of my losings like that. No, I'm retired, and I like to, enjoy myself with my wife and stuff, and we like going to the track and the casinos, but we don't do that betting over our heads because we've been there, done that. We did that years ago.
I love it, Pete. No, that's amazing.
I don't mind that I'm chipped because she knows where I am. If I get lost, I call her and I ask her, where am I? And she tells me.
Well, Tom, there's a man who's testified about why he likes to be chipped, but Pete, you bring up something very interesting. What do you say to that, Tom? That's really cool what he's talking about.
Well, they haven't put it under your skin yet. It's actually in things that you carry, right?
Yes. I wouldn't want
not under your skin, Pete. Right?
No, not at all.
At least if you go for a walk, you could leave all that at home if you want, and you could be secret wherever you went.
Sometimes I do. Sometimes, I'll take a chip and I'll put it in one of my friend's yard, and my daughter will think I'm there. But then I realize that she has a load of them on me. She's even got one in the car, like that. I did have some bouts. I did have some bouts with a little bit of dementia. I had.
Well, God bless you, my friend. No, I hope. But let me say this, and obviously hoping your health is continuing to be good here. But it's great. I hope your winnings continue if that's what happens at Aqueduct. I've been there when I was a child. I couldn't bet, but I went there with uncles, and it's still around, right, Pete? What a place. Aqueduct Racetrack. There you go. Well, let's continue. We go to line number 2. Bob from Yonkers. You've been patient. Bob, good morning. Thanks for spending time with us. How are you doing this morning? Bob in Yonkers. Yes, go ahead.
My question is there any movement in developing the new Concorde SST?
Interesting. Wow.
Oh, yeah, we were going to talk about that. The Concorde, of course, cost a fortune. That was one reason why it didn't succeed. They also had a catastrophic crash, but also it had these sonic booms, which were very loud as it went over the countryside. And that's why, of course, it wasn't allowed to fly supersonic over continental landmass. Now, if you have a Concorde and you can't fly supersonic, well, it's not going to be very cost-effective because it doesn't carry very
What's the purpose of the thing if you can't go? Right, full bore.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right. So NASA is developing this X-59, which is an experimental aircraft with just one pilot in it. It's not a very big machine. It's about 99 feet long, actually. But the point they're trying to do is they're trying to make it so that it won't make these sonic booms. And it's interesting because they say that if it's successful, the sound that you'll hear when it flies overhead is not bam, bam, as you get the leading and the trailing edge shock waves. You're not going to hear that. They say it'll be a dull thud, like somebody's slamming a car door from a long distance away.
That's very interesting.
And so they're purposely going to be flying this vehicle over populated areas to try to find out what the reaction of the public is.
Bob, take a look at this. He's talking about the X-59. It's interesting. We've been talking about that in other formats here in the aviation side. We'll get into it one day deeper. But it's the funniest looking airplane I've ever seen, Bob. It's got this long nose with no glass window. So the pilot is basically looking out on a computer screen. But the whole purpose is to, safely generate a shock wave that's not going to disrupt the air and you don't hear it. Bob, continue if you got another comment about this. Thanks for calling in. We appreciate you.
Well, I know that we're having problems with the fuel mileage. Have they solved that problem too?
Don't know. What do you say?
I don't know. The main focus of this whole project is to try to get the sonic boom down low enough that they can fly over land. Yeah, and it's interesting. You look it up on the web, for example, in Wikipedia, they have a nice entry on the X-59. 40% of the whole aircraft is nose. It's got this huge long nose that extends out front. And of course, the reason is that they're trying to have the shockwave form gradually instead of a very strong bang, the first shockwave. I mean, You have to realize that the reason you're getting these shockwaves, and you see them, in water, for example, is that what's happening is the air molecules can't get out of the way because they don't know that the aircraft is coming. And because the aircraft is going faster than the speed at which the sound is detected ahead of it. So you end up with a shock wave at the leading edge, and any irregularities like the cockpit or the wings or the tail, those all form shock waves. And as you get a little further from the aircraft in a standard supersonic aircraft, those shock waves coalesce into one shock wave for the leading part of the aircraft and one shock wave for the end, and the two of them hit the ground to get, one after the other, breathe, a tenth of a second between them, bam, bam, and those are very loud. Okay, those are
I've
loud,
heard them.
And so. Yeah,
at air shows, we've actually heard, Bob, I don't know if you ever heard it, but at the particular air shows that we've covered, they generate a shock wave like that over the crowd, and boy, I'll tell you, that's something that you don't want to miss, but you don't want to hear too often. Right there.
That's right. So then if the X-59 is successful, it will open the door to a totally new kind of aircraft, which will look strange, but not make the huge sounds that you get from the leading and trailing edge shockwaves.
Bob, thanks for being with us. We appreciate you on the Dr. Sky Experience. Have a great weekend. Let's go to line number 4, patient as they are. Shannon from Long Island. You're on the air with our guest, Tom Harris. How are you doing this morning?
Hi, good evening. This is by far the most interesting show on the radio.
Wow. I appreciate that. And, go ahead, please.
Thank you. With reference to the microchipping, well, isn't that similar to what's being done with the licenses now, the real license or the enhanced license that you need to get on a flight? I understand there's a chip in there that contains all your data, all your everything.
Biometrics.
And I wonder if that's a security breach. It can be. The government can access anything about you, which they have most of it anyway, but I'd like your guest's thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. You bring up some good points. Tom?
Yeah, well, it's always great as long as you have a friendly, government that's going to be democratic and be fair. I guess the trouble is, what are you going to do if it gets in the wrong hands? I mean, I'm an aerospace engineer, and I studied some of the history of what went on in Germany. And you had people like von Braun, for example, who were forced to use their skills to work for the Nazis. Otherwise, their families would be at risk, So the bottom line is, you don't want the government knowing all of your details. You want to be able to disappear into the woodwork sometimes if the government is not a friendly government.
Yeah, that makes sense. Shannon, a follow-up from you, if you'd like, and do appreciate the comments about the particular show and the content. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I just wonder, it's either that or you get a passport. And, because I did hear a cybersecurity specialist say something about don't get that license. Don't even bother getting it.
Interesting. Because I've even heard, Shannon, that I don't know, I don't travel a lot, but I do have a passport. Am I correct, Tom, to help Shannon out on this? Doesn't the passport, at least American passport, have some sort of microchip in it? I thought it does. That's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know about American passports, but I think that the real worry here is if you look at communist China, where, as I say, they have assigned a social score to every individual. And based on your social score, with your little credit card or whatever you're using to get on the subway, you may find that the doors don't open for you. Because if you're critical of the government, this is something they can start to turn off. And, of course, that's what happened in Canada. I mean, people say, oh, that's China. It won't happen here. Well, in Canada, our government froze people's bank accounts for months. In some cases, they couldn't get any of their money.
That's horrible.
Because they had donated or in some way supported the truckers' convoy. And of course, I mean, that is like, it shows you what governments can do. And it's interesting because in Canada, they had this emergency declaration which gave them these sweeping powers. And 2 court levels, the lower court, the middle level court, have both said the government had no reason to establish this national emergency. They had no business freezing bank accounts. So believe it or not, the government is now taking them to the Supreme Court because the government wants these powers. And we're talking about a democracy. So I mean, yeah, you don't want to have all of your biometric data and everything available to the government.
No, and I'm sure Shannon doesn't either.
Of course, that's one of the main reasons that a lot of people own gold and silver, and they buy it in quantities that are small so that it's not tracked by the government. Because if you want to have some independent way to survive, you want to have something outside of government control. You don't want to have everything in these digital banking systems. You want to have something in your drawer where you can pull out a few silver coins.
Tom, just to say this, I think everybody would agree, at least most people, that dialogue and discourse as far as, having an opinion here and no censorship at all. But, hey, maybe I'm from another planet right now when I say that. But, Shannon, seriously, thank you for your comments about the show and also your comments to our special guest. Hope you have a great weekend and appreciate you as the other listeners. Let's continue. Line number 5. As the phone lines light up, we say good morning to Dennis in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. Good morning. How are you this morning, Dennis?
Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate the opportunity. This is my first opportunity to be on the show since its beginning. And I'm an author. I have written a book called Living in the Surveillance State. I endorse what your guest is talking about. I think we have a lot of issues to deal with, more particularly and locally here in Washington, D.C. They are dealing with these photo cams on the street where the mayor here and the city council is debating whether they should remove them or not. The Congress of the United States also has a say in this as far as the district, how it is run. But the cameras do record people's speed, turns, and whatever. And it generates, over a period of 5 years, anywhere from 130 million up to over 300 million.
As in a lot of places around the country and other parts of the world, Dennis. I appreciate what you're saying. But
actually,
your point?
While you're,
go ahead.
Yeah, while you were speaking, Dennis, I looked up your book. I can see it right here on eBay. A Time for the U.S. Living in the Surveillance State by Dennis Andrew. Well, I don't know if you want me to say your name.
Please do.
But,
that's all right. You can go ahead.
Okay, Dennis Andrew Ball. It looks like an amazing book. A Time for the U.S. Living in the Surveillance State. Yeah, this looks like something I'm going to want to read.
Well, that's interesting, Dennis. I appreciate your point, but give us a summation so we can move forward. We got a big board of calls here, and we do appreciate everybody. Okay, well, we've heard that, and I appreciate Dennis from Washington, D.C. with his book. Let's say on line number 3, good morning to Alexi in Brooklyn, a regular caller. Alexi, good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Dr. Sky, and to your guest. Very pleased to have gotten through. Look, 2 very brief points, if I may, 2 points, and a last word, if I can get it. The first point is that from what I'm garnering from your conversation, again, is that these obscenities that the governments of the Western world have thrust upon the peoples of those nations, these unreasonable, absolutely horrendous laws and regulations and requirements, surveillance and such, it is time for the people of these nations to stand very firmly and react in a proper and lawful manner with the greatest of vigor against this, because we are on the edge of the cliff. Another decade and we are over the edge.
I agree, yeah. That's right. And I go to some of these freedom groups in Canada where I'll give presentations about the climate issue because, of course, that's another way to lock people down. And, you know, these freedom groups are very concerned about our gradually eroding freedom because of the capabilities of technology, the fact that they can control your bank accounts, they can control where you can go, what you can do. Yeah, so I mean, it is a serious issue, and I think people should really be standing up more for it. I really admire groups like Action for Canada who are actually looking at this on a national level in Canada, and I'm sure you have groups like Rare Foundation in the United States who do the same thing.
Alexi, please continue. I know you had another point or two, but please continue.
The second point is that in terms of the environment, you have 90 major cities in the United States that have large populations and commercial industries and such. And what they are doing is every year between June and the end of September, they are operating massive numbers of air conditioning equipment, throwing hundreds of millions upon millions of BTUs into the atmosphere. If you go to New York City and stand in the Brooklyn Promenade and look out at the city in the summer, it is crusted with a hemispherical dome of dust.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. A big heat engine, right.
What is this heat, this immense, incredible heat doing to the atmosphere here?
Well, you know, it's interesting. You have these heat domes over cities all over the world, and I'm talking about thousands of cities.
Yeah, we have one right now.
Yeah, and in fact, it's interesting. They call Atlanta in Georgia, they call it Hotlanta, because from orbit, when they look at it with infrared sensors, they can see it's like 7, 8, 9 degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside. So, you know, a lot of the global warming that we have seen, and there has been some over the last century, is undoubtedly caused by these heat domes over the cities. And so people say, oh, well, the humans cause climate change. Well, yeah, around cities we do. And with enough heat domes around the world, we're probably causing some global warming as well, simply because the cities are much hotter than the surrounding countryside.
Interesting. Alexi, I appreciate your time. We're kind of, backed up as far as the number of people that are trying to jump in on the conversation, but I always appreciate you being a regular to the Dr. Sky Experience. You know, this is interesting. So many topics to talk about, but before we hit the bottom of the hour break, I wanted you to talk about, and I think this is a fascinating article. I've read it again and again from America Out Loud. You were the author, entitled, "One of the Greatest Scams in Human History is Finally Dying." It says it all right there, but describe the, the depletion of that whole concept as far as now in 2026. What does the article talk about?
Yeah, well, I first became aware of this when the United Nations had their My World poll in 2015, and they listed 13 top priorities that they thought, humans might focus on. What should we do? They polled the world to actually find out what we thought the UN should focus on. And it's interesting because the poll was set up in such a way that the first question was always climate change, okay? So this was a biased poll. There's something called the bias effect when you do polls, and you always have the one you want to be chosen by your population. You make it the first choice because people are more likely to choose the first one. They may not even get down to number 8 or 9 or 10. Well, even with climate change, action on climate change was the exact wording, even with that as the first question, the first priority that they listed that you could choose, climate change came dead last. And I don't mean by a little bit. It was way down the list. Out of all of these different priorities, things like a better education was actually number 1. And it's interesting because the country that supplied the most input to this poll, and I don't know why, but for some reason, Nigeria actually was responsible for 26% of the over 9 million votes. That they got over 9 million votes from all countries and groups and genders and education levels.
That's surprising, yeah.
Yeah, but regardless, what they found was that almost nobody cared about climate change when you actually compared it with health care and education and affordable food and protection against crime and violence. So that's when I first started to become aware. And, of course, the UN took that poll off the web very quickly when it became apparent that their favorite child was not being chosen. It was being put dead last. I mean, even things like phone and internet access was rating far above climate change. And so I've been paying more attention to the polls, and what you're finding now across the world is a repeat of that. Okay, the concerns about climate change are just simply disappearing, and you see this in the Pew international polls. You see it in American polls. In Canada, you see it. Big changes where people are saying, "Oh, come on, I'm going to pay like thousands of dollars a year to have a negligible impact on climate? No, thank you." And so you look at the list here, and I'm just going down to the Pew Research Center. It conducted a study in 2025 on adults in 25 countries, and it's discovered that climate change did not appear as a primary concern at all. And so it's really declining. You know, one of the things that people may not like Trump, but the bottom line is that Trump to me is like castor oil. He may not taste good, but he does things that are really good. He does things that are really good for you. And
he's going to keep doing them because, hey, on this radio station, I'm sure if you listen, as many people do, obviously we can have criticism, but let's put it this way. I have never seen a president in my lifetime that's so steadfast on these issues, and the concept of truth, justice, and the American way continues proudly here. And maybe in Canada we can change it also up there to be truth, justice, and the Canadian way, but not to force you to be the American way. But look, the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, what we're hearing here from our guest, Tom Harris, in my summation, that censorship of any kind is ridiculous. It should not be allowed. Debate should be the thing. But how do you have that kind of debate on such a very controversial topic? I mean, it could be abortion. It could be other rights, gay rights. It could be all these other subjects that are important to people. But again, how do we come to the table and have a dialogue about this in the form of a debate where we're not burning the buildings down or beating people over the head and say that it's all silenced and, settled, and you're silenced? That's horrible.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, one really good trend that's appearing is the media, mainstream media, are noticing this. Okay, they're noticing that people don't care about climate change when it comes to comparison with, peace or security or their standard of living. And so what you're finding is at the same time as public support for the climate thing is going down, media are paying less and less attention to it. And, of course, this has the climate alarmists. They're really scared because the media now are basically saying, well, look, we're a business. We want to sell our media to people. And if people are not interested in climate change, then we're just not going to cover it. And so that's what's happening. We're seeing that all across the media. There's been a massive reduction in coverage of climate change issues.
Well said.
And this is because the public are telling the media for a change, we're not interested. And I think that is a wonderful development. So we may very well win this war, not with a atomic bomb. We may win it simply by having the media lose interest. And
Tom Harris, you say it so well. We're hitting the bottom of the hour break, as you know, moving through time and space. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're on the line like Max in New York City or Lou in Long Island or Tommy in the Bronx, we will do our best to get you on the air, plus everybody else that has something to opine on about our night's topic here, the great adventures that we talk about, opening our minds to some of these very important subjects. The contact number, 1-800-848-9222, and we will be right back.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Hi, this is John Yu, law professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and you're listening to the Dr. Sky Experience on Talk Radio 77 WABC.
I would like nuclear fusion to become a practical power source. It would provide an inexhaustible supply of energy without pollution or global warming. So said the late astrophysicist Stephen Hawking. 31 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, we continue with Tom Harris and you, the callers. But first, a little bit of a sky report for the main reason that we do the show. We always started off with what you can see in the wonders of the heavens. As you're now moving into this particular season of spring, Clear skies, look to the west. After sunset, the bright planet Venus adorns the sky. Just above it, the waxing crescent moon. We saw it here tonight in Arizona, and tomorrow night you can see that beautiful conjunction of objects in the sky. Jupiter high overhead, but an interesting comet known as Comet 2026 A1 MAPS, a comet discovered in Chile earlier this year, may become, and I say may with a cautionary tale, become a very bright object in the west after sunset during the early portion of the month of April. It's called a Kreutz comet. What's that? A comet that broke up a long time ago in the days of Aristotle, like 371 BC. One of those particulates may come close to the sun and give us a good light show. We'll keep you posted here on the Dr. Sky Experience. Welcome back, Tom. Let's go to the callers. Let's say good morning to, on line one, Max from New York. Thanks for your patience. How are you doing?
Thank you, Dr. Sky. Thank you for taking my phone call.
You bet.
On to the subject of chips, and not potato chips, but the chips that were being inserted in us from the CCP. If you have a criminal, I could clearly see him cutting off someone's hand and taking the hand over to a Citibank machine and scanning it in front of the Citibank machine.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Don't let it get out of hand. No pun intended.
Jeez, you're right. That sounds like one of
that's
Larry
not funny,
Niven's
but yeah.
books. You know, the science fiction writer. He has a number of books which look at these possible futures. One of them is they talk about wireheads, where people go into virtual reality and they just stay there and they starve. And so, I mean, yeah, a lot of this technology is very invasive, and we have to be careful, or we could end up with circumstances where people are killed for the chip in their wrist.
It's amazing. Yeah, Max, because you see people with their animals. We have a beautiful Bichon, a little beautiful dog, and I'm sure the dog's been chipped. I have to check with my partner. But the point is, if it's so easy for a dog to be chipped, then don't worry about it kind of thing, there obviously should be concerns, and people should have the right to object. Please continue if you're with us, Max. You bring up some good points.
Sure. I think another concern that we should have is the population of China, or a large population in China coming over here and taking up the farmland in North and South Dakota. I don't think they just want to plant grass there so they can cut it. I think this is a soft invasion. And if we are in Iran right now and we're fighting supposedly against someone who wants to do away with Western civilization, or a country that does, I think we should be concerned with it over here, that we could have a large amount of Chinese taking over land, and there's also a large amount of Muslims taking over a place in Plano, Texas, called Epic
Interesting.
City.
Yeah, I never heard that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's
I heard
interesting.
I heard that in New York City they're renaming streets, for Muslim warlords. Doesn't sound very good. But yeah, I mean, there's such a thing as benefits to multiculturalism, but we have to make sure we don't lose our core values. And, this is one of the things that really concerns me. I have 2 daughters and 3 sisters. I have no brothers and no sons. Are we going to go to a society like they have in Saudi Arabia, where, in fact, eventually women just simply don't have rights? So, I mean, or at least not equal rights. So,
well, that would be horrible,
we have to
right?
we have to be careful. I mean, multiculturalism has lots of great benefits, but there's also things we don't want to tolerate. We do not want to tolerate some of the standards that are normal in these countries. So obviously, it's not my field of specialty, but I'm very concerned when I see so many people coming from countries that don't respect women, for example.
Thank you, Max. Appreciate you being part of the Dr. Sky Experience. Let's go to line number 2. He's been patient. Hopefully he's with us. Lou from Long Island, you're on the air with Tom Harris. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning, sirs. I love your show.
Thank you.
Maybe off topic, but I drive a 1987 Chevrolet because I can afford a new car, but I refuse to have a car that tracks every minute and second of movement in that car. And then the data is sold to the insurance companies.
Boy, Lou, I'd like to buy your car. And, before Tom responds, I just sound a little stupid to people here, but here's my point. I think you would agree, sir. Can't they just manufacture a car with a carburetor and an engine and windows that have crank window and not all this electronic stuff? Wouldn't that be nice if we could do that, Lou? Wouldn't that be awesome? And then we could get rid of all those crazy electronics that cost so much when you go back to the dealership. Look at the windows, right, Tom? Right, Lou?
Yeah,
if you break
can't
one
even
of those,
open a bloody window.
you can't do
It's
anything.
like-
And look at the windshield. If you have a windshield, you have to replace on some of these electronically calibrated cars. My gosh, we live in the asteroid belt in Arizona where rocks are all over the place. How many times am I going to replace a windshield before my insurance company says I'm doing too much and they get rid of me? Lou, you brought up a good point here. I don't want a car like that either. But what do? The electronic cars. Go ahead, Lou.
You
go ahead, Lou. I'm
keep
sorry.
your 1987
No, I'm very
Camaro.
fortunate. I'm a mechanically adept, and I've
Yes.
rebuilt this car like 3 times.
Must be beautiful.
An '87 Monte Carlo carburetor, got rid of the computer and everything. It breaks, I can fix it.
You got it. I love it. That's amazing. Yeah, but how do we solve it, Tom? How do we get away from these? And maybe we're preaching to the choir here. These people that want these vehicles, everybody seems like they want collision avoidance. They want all this trackability. But Lou, you brought it up, I think, the best. You don't want some car tracking your data, selling it, and then putting it over to the insurance company that every mile you drive, everything you do. What if you had to avoid somebody on the freeway and had to accelerate? What, you might be canceled because now they notice you went faster than the speed limit in some crazy bone thing? I mean, driving around like a bonehead? That's terrible.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want to be chipped and monitored all the time.
No. But we might be the minority on here. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Lou, you get the last word. Go ahead, sir. You brought up something good.
And unfortunately, the way I drive, my insurance rate would go through the roof. I'm an old hot rodder.
I love it, man. Yeah. Even with the price of gas, right? There you go. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Lou. Hey, on the lighter side, but on a serious side, we appreciate you. Let's continue here as we move through time and space. Line number 4. He's been very patient. Tommy from the Bronx, you're on the air. How you doing?
Gentlemen, unbelievable show. And if we went back to no electronics with cars, people wouldn't know how to get in the car or out of the car.
Yeah, exactly.
We'd have a problem there, that's for sure. It'd be a big traffic jam. But anyway, you brought up so much stuff with surveillance and everything and worrying about, are we a surveillance society? Well, when we went to electronics, we became a surveillance society. No matter what anybody wants to know, any bit of electronics can be traced, it could be tracked easily. But the thing is, like, you're worried about surveillance. But you guys, and I never hear anybody ever talk about legal immigration coming into America from the third world every single day. Tourist visas are given to third worlders. They pack up all their worldly belongings. Who goes on vacation packing all their worldly belongings? People who aren't going to leave America, right? And the bottom line is they are winning. You could see they put out, I like to call it false advertising, like they were trying to blame like a bunch of crazy college kids who were going to elect Mamie Kami for the mayor of New York City. No, 85% of the people in New York City were foreign-born who voted for Mandani, Mamie Kami, I call him, and 1 million Muslims in New York City, they all voted for him too. So you've changed the country. I talk to people around the country. I say, I'm a New Yorker. How can you people put Mamie Kami in there? I didn't put him in here. You put him in here because you supported legal immigration and you let this takeover happen. Let me give you a quick story about surveillance and everything. Right after 9/11, right? I was alerted to something, and I was told to go to Kennedy Airport and see what was going on. Now, if you remember, after 9/11, nobody was really flying anymore when they lifted it. But they took me out to the international terminal, and incoming to the international terminal were all Afghanis. And the people working with customs and everything say, we don't even know who these people are. They had the prayer mats in the corners. They were praying. Hundreds and thousands came in under George Bush Jr. So they want him here. Believe me, they want him. This is no coincidence. And what they're doing is the conservative movement. People, listen, if you're conservative, they want to turn you into a minority so you have no more power. And people like Mamie Kami is going to be playing make-believe. No, make-believe during the 9/11 ceremonies. When I got to hear a bunch of open border freak politicians give speeches about 9/11, to me that's ghoulish and macabre. We lost a lot of good people on 9/11.
We did. God bless every one of them. And never forget 9/11 from all those that lost their lives across America on that horrific day. Tommy from the Bronx, thank you for bringing up these interesting points. Time doesn't permit a longer dialogue, but Tommy to Tommy, now to Tom Harris. Thank you, Tommy, in the Bronx, for your perspective. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
for
Tom
sure.
Harris.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have to be careful. You know, Western society, people like to criticize Western society, but my dad used to say something interesting. He said, look, he fought Japanese in World War II, and most of his friends in the Air Force were killed by Japanese. It was ruthless. I mean, they were told, for example, if you're captured by the Japanese, tell them everything you know, because if you don't, they will torture you until you tell them everything you know. So, I mean, that shows you the standard that existed. 27 years later, I was doing exercises with the Japanese in the Navy in Canada all through the Pacific Ocean. Mm-hmm. And so here we have one generation, and the same thing with Germany and Italy. One generation later, we're friends. And I think this is one of the things about Western civilization that we should protect. I mean, we have certain attributes that are not present in history. I mean, you look at what happened when Rome defeated was it Cartha? Well, anyway, it'll come back to me. But
the Carthaginians, right? Carthaginians,
right?
Mm-hmm.
They'd kill everybody and take the remainder into slavery. They'd salt the ground. There was no forgiveness, that's for sure. So, I mean, there's a lot of things in Western culture that we should recognize are superior to most of history. We should protect it. It didn't come free. I mean, a lot of people died to give us these freedoms, to give us a society which, despite its faults, is still far superior to the rest of the world. I mean, how many people are migrating out of the United States to Somalia? I mean, it just doesn't happen.
No, I understand. And all it should be this. It's a little different subject than we're talking about right now, not just the trust but verify thing like Reagan said. But if you're bringing people in, do it the legal way so we at least can vet people, obviously some who may not want to be here and do good things. But then again, we don't want to discriminate against those that would be here to do great things. There should be that opportunity.
Right.
We'll be right back, Tom. We got to cut it short here. The clock rules on the Dr. Sky Show and all shows throughout the universe as we continue to talk with our special guest as we move to the top of hour number 2. Time flies when you're having fun. 1-800-848-9222. We'll be right back.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Hi, this is Mark Morano, author of The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. You're listening to the Dr. Sky Experience on WABC, New York.
A foolish faith in authority is the worst enemy of truth. A quote from the great late Albert Einstein. 47 minutes after the hour, the callers rule here. And let's go to line number 1. He's been patient. Let's say good morning to Len from New York City. You're on with Tom Harris. How you doing, Len?
Hi, gentlemen. Thanks for taking my call. I don't really have a question. I have a comment I'd like to make about all this technology. I realize that if there is a chip under one's skin, that a whole lot of privacy could be compromised. However, I want to say I think that this could possibly be very helpful in situations that involve like kidnapping, like Nancy Guthrie's mother.
Good point.
I actually think that although it could violate privacy on one hand, I think it actually could benefit people and actually reduce crime on the other.
Never thought of it that way, but you bring up a good point. Tom, that's a pretty pragmatic thought right there.
Well, right, and maybe the best solution is to have a chip that you can turn off. That you can actually somehow switch it so that people cannot use it to detect your bank account and all the information. So maybe that's the sort of solution that we should be looking at, is not having no chips ever, but having chips that we can control. I guess the concern is if somebody's walking by with a sensor and your chip is passive, it doesn't actually emit calls, doesn't emit a signal, can it still be detected? I think there are technical solutions to this, and I think you're right. There's a lot of good things about it, especially for older people with dementia and things like that. It could give them a lot more freedom to move around because they could be easily picked up if they get lost.
Len, your response as we move on, please continue. I guess Len is gone. It's interesting, but on a lighter side, not to be the funny man here, it would be a way to get people to swallow the chip if you put them in the chips. So chips in the chip, that would be, but no, not to be funny. No, that would be a way to get people to swallow them regardless if they wanted to, but that's a whole other subject. You have to have a little light. Right.
Yeah,
Little
it
light
makes them
stuff.
taste good. I looked up Carthage just for interest, and it's interesting. When Rome and Carthage went to war, Carthage's population was about 700,000, and they say that it's possible, like they're not sure of the number of people killed, but somewhere between around 500,000 and 750,000 were killed. They say 50,000 were taken into slavery. So, I mean, in contrast, look at how we treated Italy, Germany, and Japan after World War II. I mean, we made them allies. So, I mean, we really are moving forward. A lot of people think the world's going to hell in a handbasket. But if you had a choice as to when you wanted to live in history, especially if you're old or if you're sick, you would choose now. And there's an interesting book, Dr. Sky, that people should look up. It's called The Other Side of History. It's on Audible, actually, and through Amazon. And what this fellow said, the historian, I can't remember his name, but it's called The Other Side of History. He says, most of history is about the generals and the presidents and the really leading figures in society. You don't hear what it's like to be a mother in ancient Rome or to be a slave in ancient Greece. You don't hear what it's like to be an average person. And at the end of the book, he goes through all these different societies. What's it like to be a knight in medieval Europe? Things like it's very, very nice book to listen to. But at the end, he says, the conclusion you come to is that, wow, we're lucky to be born when we were. Because
I guess so.
any other time in history, you might live to be 50, and that's about it. And you'd have no teeth by that age, and you have no health care, and you'd have to be carrying around weapons all the time because there's no police. So, I mean, now is a good time to live, despite all the problems the media tell us about. I'd rather live now than, in the 1600s.
Well, it's good to hear a little shot of enthusiasm and positivity here in a world that generally is talking so many of the horror things that are going on out there. But it's important that we share this information with our audience here on the Dr. Sky Experience. But in the few moments we don't have a lot of time to do it. Let's talk. We'll go out into the realm that started this particular show a year ago, talking about what's above us in the heavens. Artemis 2, we're looking now, Tom, that the potential launch date could be April 1, not necessarily that it has to launch on April Fool's Day, but being serious. This has had a lot of issues with helium leaks in the main fuel tank. They've had other issues. They had to pull it back from the launch pad, ladies and gentlemen, 39B, back to the giant building, the VAB. Supposedly the leaks are sealed. Now, what say you? I mean, any other perspective on Artemis and what it's going to do, and maybe when it gets off the ground?
Yeah, well, let's hope it goes this time because they've had so many delays. And the bottom line, though, is that there is a threat that, Dr. Willie Soon talks about. He's an astrophysicist who studies the sun. He says you realize the sun is potentially quite active over the period of their flight. So he's saying maybe they should be delaying it a little longer. I don't really know what the risk is, but I think that this is an extremely important mission. It's going to get us back to the vicinity of the moon. We're going to go further into space than we've ever gone before, and we're going to be testing out this super command module. I was at the Kennedy Space Center a little while ago, and they have a model of the new command module, essentially, the Orion spacecraft.
You got to see it.
And it's pretty awesome. And, so it'll lead to them, for Artemis 3, landing at the south pole of the moon. Which, of course, there are some areas that have shadows. They've been in shadow for billions of years, and they've actually crashed objects into the moon and then analyzed the plume, and they find that this is almost certainly water ice. So this would be a great place to set up a filling station, basically, because think about it. If you're going to Mars, you may not have to actually fill your rocket with all your fuel here. You could fill it up on the moon where you dissociate hydrogen and oxygen from the water that you find at the bottom of these craters. I mean, this is one of the purposes of going to the moon, is to basically help us prepare to go to Mars. We've got to learn to live for a long time in space because, when you're in orbit of the Earth, if you get a kidney stone or there's any serious problem, you can get back on Earth within hours. If you're halfway to Mars, it's a 7-month journey with our very slow rockets to get to Mars. Then you have to stay there for half a year or so until the planets are lined up properly, and then another 7 months to get home. This is an enormously long trip. So we need to have practice living in space for long periods of time. Having a moon base is a great way to do it.
I think you're right. And one of the things people need to know also about this particular Artemis mission and other manned spaceflight missions that go out beyond the Earth is the alignment of the moon and the timing to do this. It's all about mathematics, and that's why they're selecting these time periods when obviously they can get a quicker journey. But this time, just so everybody understands, it's not a lunar insertion orbit mission like Apollo 8 was. It's hard to believe that was back in 68. This is a flyby higher in altitude. So if you were looking out the window of this Orion capsule, you'd not be looking deep down like Apollo missions, but to swing around, come back, and do what? Check the systems on this particular spacecraft. So in the future, Artemis 3, just for a correction, will not be the lunar landing. It will be something to test out the lunar lander and all those systems in orbit. And then hopefully, as you were talking about a lunar landing, Artemis 4, but in my opinion, humble as it is, they need to perfect what the lunar lander geometry looks like. And the way I see it, these tall, skinny spacecraft, Tom, not to split hairs, they don't look anything like the big, wide, spidery legs, because you don't want what's going to happen like other spacecraft, that when you land, the thing tips over if it's not on level ground. So you got to figure that one out, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, that's right. It looks, when you look at the Starship, you can hardly imagine it landing on its tail on the moon.
It's too long. It's like putting a sausage straight up in the air or a pencil and expecting it to stand there. It doesn't have the wide legs like an Apollo lander of the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. So it's the Artemis 4 that's going to actually land on the moon, is what you're saying.
That's what they're saying right now, according to the new director of NASA, Isaacman. They've had this conversation. And again, what's the reason to race to the moon? I mean, some say China will do it and beat the Americans. Well, we've done it. Just do it safely. I'm sure that opinion resonates with listeners. Do it safely so you can have those astronauts return to their families. And again, not follow the sad path that we did when we launched the space shuttle back in 1986 that unfortunately should never have been launched due to critically cold weather. How can you launch a rocket when they're telling you don't do it when there's ice dripping off the thing? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it was very sad. I mean, the engineers told them, look, we don't know how well the O-rings are going to seal the joints in the solid boosters. Don't launch. But they were being pushed by the media. Oh, NASA's not launching it. They were saying NASA's not launching at the rate of the Ariane mission. And, here in Canada, the CBC, for example, were criticizing NASA endlessly for delaying their launches. And I finally called the newsroom, and I did get through to their producer and said, look, you're comparing it with an unmanned vehicle. Of course, they're going to have much higher safety requirements. Now, they were not interested because they wanted to criticize NASA. And then after the shuttle exploded, they then criticized NASA for launching under, dangerous conditions. I mean,
I know, it's ridiculous.
The media cannot be allowed to drive.
Do it safely. That's my point. Tom Harris, we've got to wrap it up. Thank you for being part of this show by popular demand, and we celebrate a year here on this particular archive. Folks, you can listen to the 105 previous editions of the Dr. Sky Experience at WABCRadio.com. And if you'd like to get a Sky update, a lengthy one is up at our location for the Dr. Sky Experience. Check that out. His website, Tom Harris, ICSC-Canada.com. Tom, thank you so much for being part of the show. And I'm sure if you have any way that, I'm sure you'll be back here, and certainly by popular demand. So thank you, and have a good morning. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, for sure. I'll be at the Heartland Conference, heartland.org. People, check it out.
I appreciate you. That wraps up this particular radio show, a look-see to tomorrow's program on the Dr. Sky Experience. We talk about the UFO experience, but in a much different way, informative with filmmaker Darcy Weir, talking about what the President of the United States is looking to move forward, about hopeful revelations about what's the real story behind the UFO subject for the last 50 years, maybe some revelations, and much more from our special friend and contributor, Darcy Weir, a filmmaker, an entire story about the latest on UFOs, a missing UFO scientist and general, I believe, running around somewhere in the state of New Mexico, a very interesting story, and so many more things. And also a retired United States Marine Corps colonel pilot of Cobra gunships, talking with us about what's happening in the Middle East right now and his perspective about what's happening with America and how we're fighting this particular war. When will it end? And simply, when will gas prices return? Following me, we welcome Walter Serling to Another Side of Midnight to take you through the morning hours here on this powerhouse blowtorch, Talk Radio 77, WABC, and thanks to our helmsmen, Tony and Bill, for making this show a great success. Clear skies, health, and happiness to all.
Okay, caller 1 wins courtside seats to tonight's game.
What? I won floor seats?
You did.
I've been calling for 13 months.
Wait, Chris?
Yes, I finally did it.
What are you going to wear?
Men's Warehouse. They've got today's looks for any occasion, and I need to look like a celebrity.
Don't want to stick out.
Exactly. They've got Chill Flex by Kenneth Cole, Joseph Abboud, and a tailor at every store for the perfect fit.
Congrats. You can stop calling now.
Not a chance.
Hit any look for every occasion at Men's Warehouse. Love the way you look.
It's tax season, and at LifeLock, we know you're tired of numbers. But here's a big one you need to hear. Billions. That's the amount of money in refunds the IRS has flagged for possible identity fraud. Now here's another big number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, we'll fix it guaranteed. One last big number. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for the threats you can't control. Terms apply.